Good morning, everyone. So, thank you for joining today, our second and last day for Agile training. And today we're going to continue what we have started yesterday. So, yesterday we have given a brief introduction around Agile and how Agile is different from the traditional waterfall methods, and why Agile is more and more now in place, not only on the software development industry, but as well in changing the mindset of the organization. So now we see organizations are asking their employees to be more agile and to instill the agile mindset into their day-to-day activities, because they want employees to be flexible and able to accommodate for the changes to respond to the customer request. So this is basically why agile is more of a customer oriented approach rather than a traditional approach. And yesterday we have spoken around the agile values and the agile principles. So today, inshallah, we're gonna speak around the very common methodologies and methods for agile, which is Scrum. Okay, so I'll give you a brief introduction around both methodology, or like the methodologies I'll cover today, and hope that you will get enough information around different methodology that is used in agile. So what is Scrum? I mean, have you ever heard before around what is Scrum, or what is Scrum stands for? So Scrum is a way of doing project management. It's based on the Agile Manifesto, or the Agile values and principles that we have discussed yesterday. And it's exactly the same as I've mentioned. It's based on the Agile Manifesto. So it's an iterative, incremental approach of project delivery. So before in the waterfall, we said that the delivery only happens at the very end of the project, and this is very late because sometimes customer might not be very much happy with the product you are showing the customer. So Scrum is a way of delivering the project, yet in an incremental approach. So as we have mentioned yesterday, Agile is more concerned around delivering a workable software in a few weeks' time. So a first version, not a full functionality software. So this is exactly the same as Scrum, where you have an iterative process where you deliver the project delivers on an iterative process. So as you can see, we have something called the product backlog, and this product backlog is basically standing for the customer requirement. So we have customer requirement, we might have like 100 requirement, but for this sprint, and sprint here mean the iterative approach that we are taking to implement Scrum. So this sprint, the product is delivered in a series of sprints. So the sprint backlog is what we will, like the 2, 3, or 5 functionalities, depends on the level of effort that we will take into consideration to be implemented in that sprint. Okay. Usually the sprint takes like 2 to 4 weeks of implementation. So in 2 or 4 weeks after implementation, we should be having a first version that is fulfilling the couple of requirements that we have selected for this Scrum or for this sprint. Okay. What is called by daily Scrum? So daily Scrum here, or what is meant by daily Scrum? Daily Scrum here is meant to be like a daily meeting where the stakeholders meet, specifically the business team, together with the development team, to make sure that development is happening according to the customer request. So again, Scrum? Scrum is an agile way of doing project management to deliver the project in an iterative approach. So we have all the product requirements is listed in the product backlog. Okay, and for each and every sprint here means the iteration. Each iteration, so we deliver the software in a series of iteration. The sprint backlog here is the customer requirements, or the selected customer requirement for this sprint. And for this sprint means that we are going to implement those specific functionalities that have been selected from the backlog. And this is where we're going to have a workable solution of the software fulfilling those few requirements that have been selected into this sprint backlog. Okay. طيب. What is lean? Okay, just like I just giving you a brief introduction around different things that has been related to agile. So lean, I'm not sure if you have heard anything about lean before. Have you ever heard about lean, or maybe lean Six Sigma, or Six Sigma on its own? But lean, do you know what lean stands for? Okay, so I'll follow. So lean is a way of eliminating the waste into the process. So during or having a process, uh, in some of the processes, in most of the processes we're actually having in our day-to-day activities, we are having a waste or an unneeded action that can be eliminated. And if this unneeded action and this waste will can be if this waste can be eliminated from the process, it makes the process more efficient and less time consuming and less costly for sure. So a production practice that considers the expenditure of resources for any goal other than creation of value for the end customer to be wasteful, and this is a target for elimination. So any rework is considered lean. So this is why Agile is very much focused on an iterative approach to focus on reducing the rework, because if you deliver the software version of the product at the very end, this increases the possibility of having to do a rework, and this is something that has to be eliminated. So rework here is something that Agile is working to reduce, and this is part of the lean process where you are eliminating the waste. Waiting, waiting as well is waiting if the developer is waiting for the customer requirements to come. So this is another time wasted from the developer time. So by having a product backlog and a sprint backlog, this is how we ensure that the developers, they always have a backlog, or they always have a list of requirements that they have to fulfill. Okay, and they don't have to wait, because waiting is considered a waste. Waiting is considered a waste because simply it adds time to the process. So lean, to summarize again, is something that introduces a waste into the process. So waiting time and rework time is definitely something that Agile is working for, to make sure that is sorry, waiting and rework is something that is definitely Agile is solving for, because it reduces significantly the amount of rework that has to be done, and reduces the waiting time, because the developers, they don't need to wait for the customer requirements to work. They have already the product backlog, which for each and every sprint they choose a set of requirements that can be implemented into this sprint. Other sources of waste into the process, or other sources of something that is needs to be avoidable into the process, can be overproduction. Overproduction means producing too much. Transportation, any transportation is considered a waste into the process. Inventory, if you can reduce your inventory to the minimum, this means that you eliminating waste from the process. Motion, any motion that does not add value, for example, re-entering the same information. Like, for example, we see people doing two version of a sales receipt, one which is documented, or one on a paper, and one on into the system, and this is considered a waste, because you are actually repeating the work or redoing the work. Okay, so this something that needs to be looked for or solved for in order to reduce the waste. So basically, agile, when I'm talking, or when I'm saying agile, agile is mainly solving for two main things in the lean process, or what's lean concerned with is, first is the rework, the amount of rework that has to be created. Second is the waiting time that agile is solving for as well. Okay, agile, what is the agile life cycle? So now we're going to talk about the agile life cycle. So just keep in mind, whenever we talk into agile, we talk into an approach where a workable software of the product is delivered at each and every sprint or at each and every phase. So we don't have the traditional waterfall technique that starts with collect requirements and then end this phase um, and then move to start the development and the design and then end this phase and then move to the testing phase and then finally getting the customer approval or getting the customer feedback. So this is if you can look into the screen. So in the traditional waterfall technique, we have here the initiating process, and then the planning, and then after the initiating process and the planning process, we have the execution. So basically here the agile is, you can see you have a planning followed by execution for iteration 1, and then you have another planning for iteration 2 followed by execution for iteration 2, and then you have a planning process for iteration 3 followed directly by execution process for iteration 3, and so on and so forth. Before, in the waterfall technique, the this graph was very much different. This graph was the planning for the whole of the process, or sorry, the whole of the product or the project, and then followed by execution of the whole of the project. So the project was not literally segmented to be delivered into iteration, as you can see from this graph. Is it clear? Can you see the screen now? Okay, yeah. Okay, anyway, I will repeat this part again. I'm sorry for this. So again, I just wanted to, in this graph, you saw how the agile life cycle is working, which is totally different from the traditional waterfall life cycle. So before, in the waterfall traditional life cycle, we used to have a planning phase, which is planning for overall the project and the product deliverables. Okay, this project and product deliverables is followed by an execution phase for the whole project or the whole product. Okay, here you can see in the agile life cycle that we have several iteration, and each and every iteration is having two life cycles, or two phases to be more specific. The first phase is the planning phase, and the second is the execution phase. So you see here three iteration, each iteration having planning processes for iteration number 1, which is the green curve, and then followed by the execution graph or the execution phase for iteration number 2, and then again another green curve for the planning process of iteration number 2, followed by execution for iteration number 2, and then followed by a planning processes for iteration number 3, followed by the execution for iteration number 3. So, and then last and not least is the closing processes for overall the project. So you see here that the planning is iterative. So we don't have to do the overall project planning as we have mentioned yesterday. We do planning only for the iteration, the coming iteration that we are going or we are about to execute. So in the above figure, you see repeated set of green shading, and this is the planning, and it occurs overall the project life cycle, but it occurs in a series of iteration or in a series of ways. Okay, so here we don't have an end-to-end planning as we used to have in the traditional waterfall methodology. We have here an iterations of planning. Um, let's see the difference in terms of the agile project management and the PMP book, or the project management body of knowledge framework, and how they are aligned. So here, okay, the difference is that in the PIM book, you see the initiation process, followed by the planning process, and then and then execution, and then from the execution you go to the controlling, and from the controlling usually you go back to the execution to fix out or to work for to solve for any changes, and then last and not least would be the closing project. In the agile project management, we have like a different terminologies of doing things. So the different terminologies of doing things is that we have envisioning. So envisioning, or this is to provide the vision, and this is corresponds to the initiating processes in the PMP book or in the project management body of knowledge. Body of knowledge. And then as a planning, we have something that is called speculate. And speculate, while we are doing planning, we have here the feature list, the list that we are going to implement, or the list of requirements that we're going to implement for this iteration. And then as an execution, we call it explore. And explore here means we have to complete a completed features. So we have the completed features that has been selected here in the planning. And then adapt, it means the controlling. So the controlling here, which is working for to make sure that if something goes wrong during the execution, the adaptation or the controlling process to make sure that we don't have something that is not as planned. And then after completing the adaptation for overall the life cycle of the project, we have the final product and then the closing. So this is only to give you the difference in terms of the terminology. So initiating corresponds to envisioning, planning corresponds to speculation, executing corresponds to exploring, controlling corresponds to adaptation, and last and not least, closing is pretty much the same, which is closing. So is it clear? Because I'm not sure if you have already information around the project management body of knowledge in terms of the processes, which is the initiating, planning, execution, monitoring, control, and then um, closing. Okay, so if you have good understanding of the project management body of knowledge, processes, which is initiating, planning, execution, control, monitoring, control, and then closing. It is pretty much the same. However, we do it first on the iteration level. Second, it is different terminology. So again, just zoom in. So envision, speculate, explore, completed features, adapt to get a final product, and then the closing of the project. Just to give you an understanding, okay, so the 5 phases of um, agile project management. So you see here the invasion. So invasion is to determine the product vision. So this is the same as I've mentioned as the initiating. So what is the vision of the product and what is the team is looking to work for? So this is exactly what we mean by invasion, is to provide the vision for the project that we are trying to solve for, or we are trying to do. And then speculate, which is the planning, and this is only the planning for this iteration. So we're going to have a feature backlog or a product backlog, to be more specific, and from this backlog of the product we have a set of requirements that we will choose from to be planned and to be executed in this specific sprint. So speculation here is iteration planning. Explore is the actual execution and deliver a working software. Okay, adapt is to review the deliverables versus what has been requested initially to make sure that the deliverables meet what has been expected from the customer. Last and not least is to conclude on the project, celebrate the outcome, celebrate the success, and always always document the learnings. What is initiating an agile project? To initiate an agile project, as I've mentioned, we have the iteration number 0. So from the iteration number 0, we have the product backlog, which is the list of functionality. And this list of functionality that is provided by the user or provided by the customer, okay, we have them prioritized by the business value. So we have, let's say, 100 functionality, and this 100 functionality is being prioritized. What is most important to be delivered first, and then what is less important to be delivered last. And from this product backlog, Okay, we have priorities. So priority, let's say here, if in this example, for example, you see the iteration number 0. So you have the product backlog for iteration number 0. You have allow user to create a free account. So this is priority 1, and this has been taken in this sprint. Allow subscribers to purchase music. So this is priority 3. Allow user to personalize stores experience. This is priority 9. So this is basically the product backlog, and into the release schedule we take those requirements and put it into a release schedule, which means that this is the sprint planning that we are going to produce. Usually the sprint time does not exceed a 4 weeks time of development. So after 4 weeks the product should be fulfilling those requirement that have been selected from the product backlog to be included into this current release or this current version. Right. Let's talk about what is a project charter or what is an agile charter. So it is again the same as we have in the traditional waterfall technique. So the charter is something that provides the vision. Why are we having this project? And what is the acceptance criteria or the success criteria when this project will be considered as a successful delivered project? Okay. So it's very important before starting any agile project to have this overall framework that says what is the project is looking for, what is the vision, why are we having this project, okay, what is this project all about, and what is the success criteria. So a project charter, an agile project charter, should contain or must contain a key 3 elements, and those elements are pivotal to any project charter. First is to provide the vision, why we are having this project. Second is to include the mission, what is this project about? And last would be the success criteria for the project. Okay. There might be additional elements included into the project charter, like for example, if we have a constraint onto the cost of delivering this project, or if we have a constraint around the time when is this project is expected to be delivered. But this is the first thing that has to be done before planning or before doing anything. So the first thing to do in any agile project first is to come up with the project charter. The project charter to determine what is this, to give the stakeholders, I mean, for anyone who's going to read this stakeholder, they need to understand what is this project, what it is it for, why we are doing this project, and when we will consider this project as a successful project. Okay, so this is the first thing that has to start. I have a question here. Maybe it's a bit tricky one because I have not, but let's give it a guess. So what does the Agile Triangle reflects? The difference between traditional project management and Agile project management. They emphasize that projects place on delivering value and ensuring quality. The team, product owner, Scrum Master, a design pattern. Any idea? Okay, so this one is a bit tricky, as I've mentioned. So Agile project base a strong emphasis on the value and the quality. Um, So the correct answer is A. So in general, any agile project is focusing on the first thing is to develop or to come up with a product that is workable. So they are focused on delivering value and ensuring quality rather than documentation. Um, the first question the first answer, which is the difference between traditional project management and agile project management, is as well true, but this is not the real purpose of the Agile Triangle. The answer number 3 is just listing the roles in the Scrum. Answer D is a bit funny because it reference to Peter's code book modeling in color with UML, so it has nothing to do actually with agile project management. So the Agile Triangle here is basically focusing on delivering value and ensuring we provide value rather than um, um, rather than documentation. As I've mentioned, A is already the correct answer as well, but it is not really the real purpose of what we call the Agile Triangle. So the Agile Triangle is focusing more into uh, into the quality and value over documentation. Okay. What is agile practices? As I've mentioned, we have several practices that can be considered into the agile. So the PIM book is the main basic or the traditional waterfall method, which is the PIM book, which provides the general framework of the project management. And this is the main umbrella. Under this umbrella, we have the agile technique, or we have the agile methodology, and under the agile بقى, we have several sets of different techniques of being agile. So we have scrum, we have lean, we have extreme programming, we have dynamic system development methodology, we have feature driven development. Okay, so basically we have a main umbrella, which is the PIM book, or which is the main body of knowledge which is related to the framework of project management in general, which is we're talking about initiation, planning, controlling, execution, and closing. So this is where we have the PIM book in general. And then we have under the PIM book, we have the Agile itself, which is a more of a tight umbrella that covers different sets of practices that I've just mentioned. Okay, so Agile in general is focusing on the iterative or the incremental approach of software development method. So PIMBOK is working basically more on the waterfall method, which is finish planning of the whole project, and then finish execution for the whole project, and then finish uh, developing and design for the whole project, and then test, and then go for the customer. So this is the traditional PIM book. However, when we go into the agile, so it is very much based on the PIM book. So it is not a different science, it is the same science. However, the only difference is that we do the same framework or the same knowledge that we have learned in the PIM book, we use it exactly in the agile, but instead of doing it on the project level, we do it on incremental iterative level. Clear what is the difference between project instead of delivering the project as a whole? Type. In the traditional flipping the iron triangle. So let's explain this further. Uh, so in the traditional waterfall approach, we have the cost and the time, okay, and the scope, which is the feature here, and in the middle we have the quality, and always the quality has been questionable. Why the quality has been questionable? Because the quality is function of both time and cost. If you want to increase the quality, then most probably you will need to increase the time. You need more time to fine tune and adhere to the quality, and if you want to fine tune as well the quality, you need more time to put into the cost aspects. So the traditional waterfall iron or three sides triangle is scope, cost, and quality. Is scope, cost, and time, and always the quality has been in the middle. And the quality has been always a question because it's a function of time and cost. Whenever you want to increase the quality, it is a competing constraint, as we used to say, specifically for the quality. Competing constraint means that they are fighting against one another. If you want to increase quality, you have to increase either time or cost, or actually both of them. In the iteration approach or in the incremental approach in the agile, we flip the triangle. So we put the quality as the focus and in the heart, and it is not a question. Uh, we have the features, which is the backlog, and we develop the release backlog for each sprint. Okay, and for each sprint we plan for it, and we always focus on the quality because our first priority is we value the quality of the product and the workable solution much more than we value other parts of iron triangle. Okay, so basically, this is to answer the question that we have had few minutes back, is that it is covering the same triangular approach. However, feature is the base, so this is what is the feature, and then followed by quality, and then quality, I mean here is impacting both time and cost. So you can see in the traditional approach, the features are fixed. What is meant by that is that we have a list of backlog, let's say 100 requirement, it is fixed, and you have to fulfill those list of 100 requirement within the time and cost that is already mentioned, and you might play with the quality to meet the time and cost constraints that has been listed. On the alternative approach, which is the agile approach, you have the features. This one is the variables. So you want to deliver in 2 or 3, you want to deliver the next workable version of your product into 4 weeks. So you select from the features backlog those features that has higher priority, and then they can be implemented within the 2 to 4 weeks time, that is the timeline for the approach, or for the sprint. And this is how you select your feature for or the release backlog. Is it clear? I know it might be a bit confusing, so please, if you feel like you're not 100% getting what I'm saying, just tell me and I will try to repeat myself in different ways. More now, the features are more variables than used to be fixed before, and we just pick according to our deadline, or according to our sprint planning, in order to fulfill the plan. Type. That was one of the first one of the first basics of agile. The second is that we have to focus on the business need. We always focus on the business need rather than the time and quality, rather than the time and cost. So always the focus on making sure that we fulfill the business needs. Decisions based around the project goal. We are here to deliver a workable software solution that fulfills the business needs when it needs to be delivered. This requires the team to have very much understanding of the business priority. So this is why we have in the product backlog, we have the business team sitting with the developer to determine the priorities of their project. So we have a feature of 100, we have a backlog of 100 feature that needs to be implemented in this software solution, and this is the priority. We give priority for the 100 feature. So this is very important to give an idea and to give an understanding for the developers, what is the exact priorities that we are looking after, what is the priorities of this project. So we might have a feature that is important, but it is not necessarily like has to be placed as number 1. It can be number 2, can be placed number 3, and so on and so forth. So understand the true business priorities, establish a sound business case. So without having a solid business case, we will not be able to deliver. Okay, seek continuous business sponsorship and commitment. The sponsors has to be fully committed to this, and through this iterative process of getting the backlog, or scanning the backlog and choosing from the backlog, we are always focusing on the commitment from the sponsors, and always that priorities keeps on changing. And this is one of the main benefits of agile, is that it solves for what it solves for, or it makes sure that even with priorities changing, we still we are still accepting this change and working for it, or solving for it. Okay, this is supported by the business roles, and this is supporting by what we will view, inshallah, in few minutes, what is called prioritization and time boxes, and we agreed on foundation stage. Okay, so basics of agile is that we always focus on the business need. What is the business looking to achieve? What is the goal of the business and what the business is looking to achieve? And this is what the products has to focus to deliver. And this is what the project team and specifically the developers and the business team has to make sure that this message is clear enough to make sure that we are delivering for the customer needs and not deliverable, because again we are focusing on delivering a workable solution. Type deliver on time. This is another basic of the project of the agile project management methodology, is that we always aim to deliver on time. We have the 2 to 4 we have a time frame to implement each and every sprint, and we select the requirements from this backlog or from the product backlog, taking into consideration that we want to fulfill those requirements and we want to achieve and obtain those requirements into this time framework of 2 to 4 weeks. Usually, the sprint is designed to take place into 2 to 4 weeks. So, time box that works. Focus on business priorities. So, we will choose from the product backlog the requirements that is first of high priority. Second, can be implemented in this 2 to 4 weeks time frame. It depends on the size or the time of the frame. Always aim to manage to achieve the deadlines. This is supporting by a key technique, which is boxing and Moscow technique, and this I will cover in a few minutes, inshallah. طيب, another basic, which is collaborate. It is very, very well known basic of agile methodology, is that we are working on a collaborating or a collaboration approach. So, I mean, we have the right stakeholders available at the right time. We ensure that the team members are empowered to take decisions. So, we are talking agile. So, we are talking about the agile mindset. So, we have to make sure here that while talking about the agile mindset, the people are empowered to take the right action, because we want decisions to be fast, to be taken fast, and we cannot afford to wait for a manager approval or sponsor approval, blah, 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 and so on. We want the people to take action and deliver quickly. So we have to make sure that our people, sorry, are empowered and they can take decision. And this is very much supported by the business role. And the key technique here is to have a facilitated workshop, to have the people sit together, work together. As we have mentioned in Agile, we have a self-organizing approach, or we have a self-organizing team. So they sit together in a workshop, they agree together on the priorities, and they work together to build a one team culture. Collaboration and feedback loops. It is always important to make sure that we capture the feedback. So the traditional methods will only work uh, um, but it will not work. It will only work for so long, because there's no little feedback before delivery. So before, there was almost no feedback or very little feedback before delivery, and only during the delivery we figure out the surprise that this is the customer expectation versus what has been delivered. And the change that is not expected. I mean, a change can happen into the process that was not expected by the project team. So this is why the agile is more and more considered now, because it always consider the feedback loop, because you have a workable version of the software, you get the feedback from the customer, you add or remove features into the product work backlog, and this is how you each and every time after reviewing the product, after delivering a specific sprint, you basically review the backlog. You review the backlog because of the feedback you got from the customer, either by adding a new request or removing a request. So this is how the agile is more considering the constant feedback loop, okay, and constant feedback in general from the customer and from other stakeholders, and they are always expecting the change. Yesterday, we have mentioned that Agile is all about expecting and anticipating that a change is going to happen. So, this is number one. Number two is that how to make sure into the life cycle of the Agile or into the Agile life cycle that those changes are planned for. Those changes are planned for. So how those changes are planned for? Basically, those changes are planned for by the simple iterative incremental method of Agile. Is that you receive the feedback, you may have new requirement from the customer, and you only add it or remove it to the customer to the product backlog. And while adding it to the product backlog, this makes sure that you're always continuously capturing the feedback from the customer. Just to recap before moving forward, what is the basics into the Agile project management technique? So first, we have changed the triangle, or we have flipped the triangle, or we have reversed the traditional triangle that we used to have in the traditional waterfall techniques. So before, we used to have the features as fixed. Now we have the features variables. Before, we used to and those variable features, which means that the requirements of the customer keeps on changing. We try to fit them into the time of the sprint, into the sprint, taking into consideration that we value more the quality. So quality now is no longer a question in the Agile methodology as it used to be a question, or we used to oversee the quality because of the time and cost constraint that we might have. This is no longer a luxury into the Agile methodology because quality now cannot be overseen. So this is number one basic, that we have reversed the triangle. Another basic, which is focus on the business need. We have prioritized list of requirements listed in priority 1, 2, 3, 4, and this priority list keeps on changing based on the feedback loop we are getting after each and every iteration or incremental delivery of the product, to make sure that we are focusing onto the business and we delivering what is actually the business is actually needing. So we have to focus on three business priority and continuous support from the sponsorship and their commitment. We focus on deliver on time. This is another basic of the Agile, because we have the sprint that takes a time frame of 2 to 4 weeks, and we always deliver on time. We always stick to the deadlines. Collaboration is another basic of the Agile, where the self-organized team, they arrange and organize themselves into the best way to make sure that they deliver the product, build one team culture. um, so this is basically supported by making sure we give the team the right empowerment and the decision making authority for those people they are concerned with. And we have spoken around here the feedback loops and how the Agile is always taking into consideration continuous feedback loops, and they're always anticipating that this change is going to happen, unlike the traditional method, which is not doing the same. Type. Common understanding, document can generate the meaning into others. So here, as we have mentioned, one of the values yesterday is that we value people interaction and people collaboration. So this is one of the values for Agile. So this is a focus. So people need to talk, and people need to meet face to face, rather than putting a documentation in place that is not readable or not agreed by all, or provides ambiguity to some of the stakeholders. So this is a common understanding. To reduce the cost of change, because Agile here is all about change. So when we talk about Agile, it means that we are talking all about the change. We have to accept the change. We have to anticipate the change. We have to put the change into the Agile life cycle that we are working for. So Agile methods supports the experimentation and adaptation by reducing the cost of change. Why it is reducing the cost of change? Because the change is not happening very late in the process. Because if it happens very late in the process, the cost of the change will be very high because you have to rework a significant amount of time and you have to rework a significant amount of features that you have already developed. So Agile makes sure that it reduces the cost of change by anticipating and accepting the change very early in the process. And this is definitely happening through the feedback loop that is always happening at each and every iteration. Another basic of agility is never compromise the quality. Quality is not a question in the agile project management technique. It is not an option to compromise the quality. So this is why it is different from the traditional waterfall, is that quality was always foreseen as a competing constraint versus the time and cost. So if you need to put more quality, you need to get more skilled people to do the job. And if you need more skilled people, that will ultimately increase your cost, or you will need more money to make sure that things are going right. Sorry, more time to make sure that things are going right. And this is where the quality has always been seen as something that impacts both quality, time, and cost. In agile it is different because this is something that is not negotiable anymore. We have a level of quality. Quality is not a variable anymore, it is fixed. We have to deliver within a very, very good quality. And this is happening, this is happening through early testing and continuous feedback loop. This is happening through the early testing. So we have at each and every iteration a test. And this test makes sure that this feature, this small feature, is working up and running and everything is working okay. So by repetition of testing, by doing a several iteration of testing, this ensures that we have a good quality product. So testing the products early and integrated testing, this is definitely a way of making sure that quality is not negotiable in the agile, or we cannot compromise the agile. طيب. The incremental value delivery. So you see here in the traditional waterfall technique, we have the analyze and then design and then code and then test and then do the documentation and then deployment. So here in the agile, we have the concurrent development. So we actually have analyze, design, code, test, documentation, and deploy is happening into one iteration. And the following iteration, we will have another cycle of analyze, design, code, test, document, and deploy for the feature that were selected to be implemented in this sprint. So this makes sure that we realize value steadily, we validate the design each and every time, and we continuously adapt to the risks and changes. And we always integrate these changes as early as possible and as often as possible to be customer oriented. يبقى the difference between waterfall serial of development, where you have to analyze for the whole project, you have to design the whole project, you have to start coding for the whole project or the whole product, and then you test lump sum the whole product, and then you document the whole product and then end with deployment. So if anything goes wrong, the cost here is very likely to be very high because it's very late in the process, the change, or if anything goes wrong, the rework cost is very high. However, in the agile, we make sure that we integrate those steps: analyze, design, code, test, document, and deploy in each and every iteration, to make sure that it is we are always adapting to the risk that a change is happening. We integrate the customer feedback as early as possible and as often as possible, and we build our software incrementally. So it is not something that, hey, Mr. Customer, surprise, this is your product. We build the product incrementally to make sure that this is meeting the customer constraints and the customer needs. Type. To compare the agile principles versus the traditional waterfall principles. So the principle is that one key agile principle is to focus on the highest value first. So we want to deliver a project that fulfills the team vision and prioritizing the business need by using a well architectured code. So we need a good code to deliver a good quality product. In the traditional waterfall technique, we are building all or nothing. So we have to design for the whole project and implement the whole product once and for all. So there is always bias towards building our internals in a breadth first fashion means that nothing can be delivered in isolation. We cannot deliver something in isolation. You have to deliver the whole project as a lump sum. Responding to the change, and this is a key feature and key principle definitely to Agile, is that we always respond to the change. We always respond to the change by having this incremental approach. Continue. We don't have a solid plan that covers the products end to end. We have an iteration plan, and this iteration plan is only planning for the following iteration, and it is not an end to end. In the traditional waterfall technique, we have what we call a baseline and change control. By baseline and change control, we mean here we have the end-to-end project plan. So we put this as a baseline. If you need a change to it, you need to put into a place a change control methodology to make sure whether this change is according to the baseline, yes or no. And if it is no, most likely it's going to be rejected, or most likely we are going to update the time and the cost of the project. So in traditional project management approaches, we always talk about the baseline. What is the baseline? What is the baseline? We always tell our project manager before accepting or denying a change, look at the baseline and see whether it fits into the baseline, yes or no. In the agile, it is different. We always tell the project managers, please accept the change, and please not accept the change, please respond to the change. So please plan the change. So put it in the next iteration or put it in the product backlog, for example, so you can plan for it in the following iteration. One key agile principle as well is iterative approach. So we have a short time box, usually it's 2 to 4 times to deliver a workable software version. Here it is a phased approach. There's no rhythm actually where the project is getting executed. We just have like, okay, this is the milestone where you have the first version of your product. Agile is as well focusing on feedback and continuous improvement, and this is through the iterative approach. Unlike the traditional waterfall, that is not very much looking at the continuous improvement. It just documents the lessons learned at the end of the project, which is very late, for the coming projects to use from. So here, the feedback is considered for the upcoming or for the following project. However, in the Agile, the feedback is considered in the same project, but only in the following iteration or in the coming iteration. So waterfall only do the feedback at the end for the future projects to benefit from. So this project is not likely to benefit from. However, in the agile principle, the benefit is, or the feedback is captured for this project only for the second or the upcoming iteration. In the agile, one key thing is that we have small teams. We have a small self-organized teams. So having those small teams makes the project works faster and makes the project work faster because we don't have a chain of people or a large set of people that each and every one has to provide his feedback, and we go into cycles of discussion and documentation and views and debates and so on. So often in Agile, you have a small team that is working on the project, and we will talk about the roles and responsibility of the team. So usually you have a project manager, a product owner, and the developer. But in the traditional waterfall, you have a big team. So you have a project manager, project coordinator. We have people from different functional areas where you might have silos between those teams and a lot of handoffs and handover from one team to another. Technical excellence, so quality, again, we're talking here around quality. We have to make sure that we have strong engineering principles to ensure quality is taken care of, versus is inspection. We only inspect after, or we only test the product after getting implemented or after implemented. So Agile is empirical, it's not a definitive. So it is up to the self-organized small team to see how best they provide the direction for the upcoming. So it is them who decide what will happen in the project. And it is not a definitive approach as we have in the waterfall traditional technique that you have to do 1, 2, 3. It is up to the project team that they take the path they believe it is best for the project. And this is why we're saying it's a self-organized team and small team to make sure the decision making process is easier, because if you have a team of 50 people, definitely to take a decision is much difficult than having a team of 7 or 6 people working on this project. So it is a process where you get the team define the best for them, and not like this is has to be done. um, so it is not true that the agile project does not use a definitive process and it is totally uncontrollable. It is just an empirical approach where the team decides the best based on the circumstances. So as you can see here from the photo, uh, the team are surfing based on the conditions. So maybe they are working hard during some areas and working less hard in other areas. So this is really based on the conditions they face on while they go. So this is why it is very important to make sure that we empower the people and we give them the right decision making approach to make sure that they take the right decision as they go into the agile life cycle, which is usually defines um, the agile methodology. So the Scrum is an example of an agile or empirical process, is that the process itself is adaptive. So it is not something that is very much predictive. You don't predict what is going to happen next because you never know. You adapt to the changes, and changing the requirement is happening across the project. It depends on the circumstances. So you evaluate, assess, design, and implement. So it's an empirical process where the process itself is very much adaptive according to the changes that is happening across, or the circumstances that is happening across the way. Okay, I will do that. So before I'll do that, I will do that moving forward. Do you believe that there's any other thing that needs to be if I need to elaborate more or explain more on one of the things that we have discussed so far? So in terms of the agile basics, focus on quality and business and deliver on time, and never compromise for the quality. And then the incremental approach versus the phased approach in waterfall. And then last is the defined process versus the empirical process, which is a very much adaptive process. So far, this is what we have been discussing over the past 1 hour. So if you feel like there's something that I need to repeat, please let me know. I believe once you go into the slides and start reading them one by one, you will figure out that maybe I'm talking too much. But the amount of information or content is in them is pretty much the same. So I believe, like, if you go into the presentation and read the slide, it will be much more simpler. And yeah, you will not, maybe I'm talking too much, but yeah. So what is Scrum? As we've mentioned, Scrum is a way. No, that's fine. That's fine. Uh, um, Scrum is a way of an incremental project delivery framework. So this is how you deliver the project in an incremental approach. So before, in the traditional waterfall technique, you used to have this product backlog, which has all the characteristics and requirement of the project. Okay, and all the characteristics and the requirement of the project is going to be implemented and designed for once at all, and they're not going to be prioritized. You have 100 action or 100 requirement, so the developers will see those 100 requirements and they will start building the code for this product once and for all for the 100 requirement. In Scrum, it is different because we have an incremental approach. So we take from this product backlog, like if we have 100, we take only 3 or 4. How those 3 or 4 requirements are going to be selected for this sprint backlog, they are going to be selected based on the priority, because the product backlog, it always, each and every requirement always come with a priority from the business team. What makes sense for them, what requirements make sense for them more to be delivered first. And then and then this and this is a criteria, and it has to be fit, the requirement has to be fitting to be delivered into the timeline for the sprint, which is usually 2 to 4 weeks. And the team meets on a daily Scrum meeting. Each 24 hours they meet. The team here, I mean the business team and the developer, to make sure that the development and everything is working as per the plan. So the product is delivered on an incremental phase. Each and every 2 to 4 weeks, a workable software version of the product is to be delivered. Your question, I have a question. Can we see the Scrum is the final result of the product? I'm not sure I get your question, Azil Khafi. The Scrum, it is not a product or it's not a result. The Scrum is a way to deliver the product. فالسكرام, it is only a way of planning your project. Instead of doing the project at all or at once, a full project, you divide your project into incremental phases, and you finish phase 1 and then move to phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4, and so on, and it is incremental. So you get the feedback each and after each and every iteration of delivering the product. So Scrum itself is not a result, or Scrum itself is not a product. Scrum itself, it is the way you use to deliver the product or to deliver the software. So you use this incremental approach. I mean by this, you use this incremental approach where you gather a subset of the requirement and you deliver them, and then you move forward to deliver another set or another subset of requirements. So Scrum itself, it is the methodology, or it is the way of doing project management in an agile way to make sure we deliver incrementally, but it is not a result or a product on its own. Okay, is it clear? طيب, let's forget about lean. How we deliver into agile way, is that we have iterations of planning followed by execution, another iteration of planning followed by execution, another iteration of planning followed by execution, and so on and so forth. So this is how the life cycle of agile is making sure we develop the product into an iterative approach. And by doing this iterative approach, okay, we ensure that the feedback is always captured, because at each and every iteration we have this testing phase. At the end of each and every iteration we have this testing phase, so the customer is able to test and see the product, the workable version of the product. And when the customer is able to test and see the workable version of the product, this is where the customer can give feedback to change or to amend, or can increase a requirement. So this is how agile is making sure that it's an adaptive approach or an empirical process, that it keeps getting a continuous feedback from the customer and keeps revisiting the process to adapt according to the needs of the customer. I'll give you an example for this one. For example, I'm developing a software application or a mobile phone application that is building there is an online for an online store, for example. Okay, so this software application, I'm delivering it according to the agile methodology. At the second iteration, while the customer is testing, he figured out that there is a new requirement that needs to be added, which is, for example, he needs to put a picture for each and every product that is already tested on someone. Yani it's not only the project, sorry, it's not only the product that is seen in the picture. No, he wants to see if, for example, if it's a watch, he wants to have a human hand wearing this watch to give like the reality feeling for the customer. If it's a bag, he wants to see someone carrying this bag. If it's a t-shirt, he wants to see someone wearing this t-shirt. So this is a new requirement. So this requirement emerged after the testing of iteration 2, for example. The customer realized that it would be better to have this real feeling of the product by having human beings testing on this. Okay. And so this is a way of, and this new requirement was not initially in the first backlog. So after iteration 2, the agile team or the agile project management will put this new requirement into the product backlog and ask the business team or ask the customer more specifically to give it a priority. And based on this priority, maybe it's going to be selected for iteration number 3 for development. So this is how the agile life cycle is an adaptive empirical process that adapts itself according to the changes and the needs of the customer. Um, just another thing. طيب, much clear, alhamdulillah. I like the smiley face, which means things are getting يعني somehow there's a light. Alhamdulillah. طيب. What is the difference in terms of terminology between the project management body of knowledge and agile body of knowledge? The difference is we have what we call initiating process. Here we call it the envision process. And the envision process, the output here is we deliver something that is called a project charter. A project charter that it has to provide the vision to the project team. Why we are doing this project, what is this project all about, when we will consider this project as a successful project. And then speculate here, it means that we have to come up with a release plan, which is a plan for this increment or for this iteration. And this release plan is always coming from where the feature list or the backlog we have for the product, and from any control action that has happened from the previous iterations. Okay. Then you have explore, which is actually starting executing the process. And while executing the process, you have a completed version features, and these completed features, they may go to an adaptation or controlling plan to come up finally with the final project. So this is best to show you the difference in terminology between the project management, which is initialize, plan, execute, monitor and control, close, versus the agile project management, which is those ones. Okay. Type. In the initiating plan or into the envision plan, we have to come up with something that is called the project charter. What is the project charter? The project charter is basically to provide the vision. What is the vision? Why we need this project? What is the mission? What is the project and what it states what will be done into the project? And finally, what is the success criteria for this project? Back to this slide. So here you have the product backlog. So you have a list of requirements that has been prioritized by the business. Yani business teams or the customer are the one who has given priority to all the requirements of the product. And then you have the release schedule or the release plan, which says in 4 weeks' time, I'm going to implement those 3 priorities or those 3 requirements. Maybe this one we did already. Yeah. Agile practices, we said that الagile is based on the PIM book, يعني based on the same body of knowledge and the same knowledge you got from the PIM book. The only difference is that the PIM book is working on the planning, execution, monitoring, control into phased approach, and you do it for the whole project at once. However, the Scrum approach is used for an incremental software development. And you have a list of requirements. You choose from those list of requirements. You do the planning and execution and monitoring control for those requirements, and then you repeat the iteration. طيب, the reversible or the flipping iron triangle, before in the traditional method, the features were fixed. Now here in the agile we have a fixed, we have the variable features are variable. Why the features are variable? Because the product requirements keeps on changing based on the customer needs, and we always focus on quality, so it is not something that is has to be compromised for. We always focus on quality and making sure that we deliver each and every iteration into the 2 to 4 weeks time of each and every project. Okay. طيب, what is the basics? We focus on the business needs. So we focus on what the business actually needs. We have to make sure that to focus on what the business actually needs to understand the true business priorities. Okay. This is a key fundamental basic. We have to focus on what is the business need. We deliver on time, which is the 2 to 4 weeks that is scheduled for each and every sprint to deliver from. We have to collaborate. We work as a one team culture. We have a team of self motivated, empowered people to make the decisions in order not to lose time by chasing others to give their decisions. And it is always based on the feedback loops, and this feedback loops is integrated already in the life cycle. How? By getting the constant feedback, and we have always to expect and anticipate the change that is going to happen. And this is how agility is focusing on reducing the cost by eliminating or reducing the risk to have a change at the very end of the project, which needs a rework, and it needs definitely more time and cost. So integrating the change at the very beginning ensures that we have captured this part for costs. Is it clear now? Let's quickly try to capture what we still have for the rest of the day. So I hope now it is getting a bit clearer, الخفي and all, in regards to what I've been, I mean, yeah, maybe the contents looks, I mean, too much. But if you, when we went back onto each and every slide, I think the contents is pretty much the same. It's like different way of saying things. So it is not really a big contents as much as like I try to say things in different way just to make sure that you have captured all the terminology that is needed for the agile project management. So far it's okay. Okay. So, you know, now this is the way the waterfall used to work, that you have to analyze for the whole project and then design, code, test the whole project, document and deploy. But here you have this steps going concurrently for each and every status, for each and every iteration, to make sure that you capture the request and you integrate the changes as early as possible to continuously adapt for the risk of change that is always happening from the customer point of view. Okay, so is it clear? And this is how we mentioned that Agile is not a defined process where you expect what is or you predict what is happening next. And when a change is happening, you foresee this change as that has to be controlled and limit. You have always in the waterfall methodology or in the defined process methodologies in general, you always look at the change that this is something that you have either to limit or to very closely control it. Unlike the empirical approach, unlike the empirical approach, where you have an adaptive process that you expect the change, you anticipate the change, and you actually change is something that is very natural that has happened into this adaptive empirical process. And the advantages definitely of it is that you have less overhead, you have less rework, you have faster time to get into the market. This what we have yesterday explained. You have very adaptive to sometimes to the extent sometimes that it's uncertain changing requirements versus the less predictability. The only disadvantage for the empirical approach is that you have less prediction around the actual cost and schedule. And this is why we said that it's a reverse triangle, where the cost and and the time is very much unpredictable because the requirement is very adaptive and keeps on getting changing as well. Okay. طيب. So rolling wave planning, this is something that we have already mentioned into the project management framework, that you have a rolling wave planning. So you have an iteration of doing planning. So you have at the iteration level, okay, you have iteration planning that considers the tasks that needs to be implemented and tested into this iteration. The day planning, so you have the daily planning that will for each and every team they sit, I mean the Scrum team or the Agile team, they have a 30 minutes meeting each and every day to design and to plan for the work for today. And then there is a release planning, the release planning, which is each and every release will come up with a set of feature. And here the release is a bit higher than iteration. So several iterations can come up with a release. So you have a release of the project, a full, release number one of the product, release number two of the product, and release number three of the product. And finally, definitely is the product level. So you have to do the planning on overall the product level. Portfolio is all the products within the portfolio, and strategy is just like the strategic planning that we have for each and every company. We definitely have a strategic planning. So this is what I mean by multiple level of planning. So you plan your day by the Scrum team, you plan your iteration by choosing this list of requirements to go into this iteration specifically, and then you have different releases of the software, and those releases are comprised of several iterations, and several releases will come up with the product at the end of the project. Okay. So again, as you can see, this is like another way or layers of the product. You have the backlog item. So this is all the requirements, and based on the backlog, you start to do the iteration or the sprint, which is the user stories that you, which is the user stories that you're going to take into the place. And then the release, which is the release roadmap. You have a full release of the software. And finally, you have the product that meets the product goals, the product charter that was initially chartered to give the vision of the product where we want to be. So here is the backlog, and the backlog here you have a list of requirements, and those requirements we deliver them or we list them in a story. We say this is a story, okay? And for each requirement, we have the acceptance test. What is the acceptance test? It means that this requirement will be accepted only if it delivers 1, 2, 3. For example, based on the story, you have the iteration or the sprint, where you have the iteration plan or the sprint plan, and then you start to use the user stories that is coming from the backlog to come up with the iteration. Finally, you have not finally, I mean, you have then several release. So release is comprised of several iteration. So several iteration, you can come up with release number one, release number two, release number three. Just as you see in your mobile phone, for example, you see like in iPhone or in Android phone, you see like for iPhone specifically, you have an iOS upgrade 12.1.1. So this is release number 1.1. And then you have another release, which is 12.1.1.2. And then you have another release, which is 12.2.1 and so on. And then maybe another, and then maybe another software. And then those releases will come up with the product overall. Okay, back to the principles that we have been discussing yesterday. We are talking here, ya jama'a, around self-organized and empowered team. And those self-organized and empowered team, we don't have a real project manager, we don't have a leaders, we don't have someone who will have to tell you, dictate you how to work. It is a self-organized team where those people work together to provide guidance and provide direction and information. Okay, so let's كده brief up in terms of some terminologies. Some terminologies. So in terms of the terminologies, sprint in Scrum, extreme programming is iteration, which is the fixed length period of time, our time box, which is usually in Scrum, it's 2 or 4 weeks maximum to deliver a feature. Release or small release, which is a release to production. Planning of the release is called sprint or release planning. Here it's in extreme programming, it's called planning game. And this is agile planning meeting. A product owner is the one who owns the product. In the extreme programming, it's called the customer, which is the business. The business, in a nutshell, this is the business people who are representative to the project. Retrospective or reflection, which is the lessons learned style meeting that we have already. We have what we call Scrum Master or Coach, and this is what we call the Agile Project Manager. And be careful here, it's like this is not a traditional project manager, it is more of a coaching style, or someone who's there to harmonize the organization and the work between people. And it is not a traditional project manager with a level of authority and so on. So it is more of a coach rather than an authority project manager. Development team, the team or the cross-functional team that is working on the development of the product. Daily Scrum, which is the daily briefing team that is set up to, or the daily stand-ups in the extreme programming, which is the briefing team to make sure that we capture for or we plan for the day. Just for the meetings, so we have iteration 0, and usually the attendees of this iteration is the team, the project owner or the product owner, the other stakeholders, key stakeholders, and user. This usually happens at the start of each and every project. It takes approximately 1 to 3 weeks of 2 to 4 hours workshop, and this is basically to come up with the project charter. A release planning is a meeting that happens between the product owner, the Scrum Master or the project manager, key stakeholder, and this is to at the start of each and every release. It takes usually 2 to 4 hours, and this is to determine what this release will be included, or what is the feature that is gonna be included into this release. Daily stand-ups, which is the daily meetings that is happening between the team. It's 10 to 15 minutes. Usually it takes 30 minutes in reality. And this is to plan for today and to facilitate the coordination between the team. Iteration planning, and this is to plan for each and every iteration. And this is to conclude, or this is to capture requirements from the product backlog. And this always usually happens at the start of each iteration. Iteration retrospective, which is the lessons learned and the issues to learn from it for the following iteration. And this happens at each and every iteration. And usually it takes 30 to 40 minutes. And it is between the team, Scrum Master, and the product owner. Iteration review, which is to review the functionalities that has been developed, and it happens برضو at the each and every iteration, and it takes 1 to 1.5 hours of time. Okay, so this is to summarize the Scrum meetings and how it happens, when it happens, and it is very important when you are adopting an agile methodology is to reorganize your meeting to follow this approach. So you have an iteration zero, a team, a workshop of 2 to 4 weeks that takes a time frame of 1 to 3 weeks to build up the processes, to build up the project charter. Okay, and then you have to do release planning, iteration planning. Release planning is to plan the overall release, and this is the beginning of each and every release. Iteration or sprint planning, this is to plan for each and every sprint. Okay, iteration retrospective, and this is to document the lessons learned. And if you remember, in the waterfall technique, we used to document the lessons learned at the very end of the project, which means that the lessons learned will be useful for the upcoming projects, not this project. But here, the lessons learned are used for each and every iteration or sprint to make sure that it will be captured in that sprint. Iteration review, which is basically the testing of the functionalities, and this happens at each and every end of iteration. Last is, or not last, what is happen on a daily basis is that we have a 30 minutes, or I mean, as per the guidelines, it's 10 to 15 minutes, where the project team meets the Scrum Master, the team, to say, to coordinate, to list up any issues, to mention what has been achieved so far, and so on. Okay. So this slide is not introducing anything new. So here I'm talking about how the agile works. So we have a small team, a self-organizing team. They need to deliver, and they have a backlog, and they choose from this backlog. So nothing new specifically on this slide. The incremental and iterative process. So as you can see, iterating allows you to move from a vague idea, you don't actually know what you are going to deliver, into a rough, polished idea. Incrementing idea, so you know ahead that you need to deliver this, and you build it into a block. So this is basically how Agile is working on an iterative incremental approach. Sometimes you don't know what you want to deliver and you have a great idea, so you keep on developing the idea as you go. And sometimes as well, you know exactly what you need, and you keep on building small blocks until you actually reach the ultimate goal, what you were expected to do, or what you are looking to do. So this is the difference between iterative and incremental. يبقى iterations are regularly scheduled, pre-planned time boxes where you know to provide predictability and to synchronize points of planning. Um, in this time box, we have sprint, our iterations, which is the amount of time or length that is given to develop this specificity. You have a working sessions, which is the daily sprints. You have a retrospective at the end of each and every iteration. طيب. Let's talk about around another principle, which is principle number 5 from the agility, is that we build incrementally. Yani, what do we mean by we build incrementally? We build into an iterative approach. We build the base or the foundation, and then we start building blocks after blocks. And this is how we create solid knowledge about what we are expecting to deliver through exploration and engineering, specifically when we don't have a clear idea of what we want to deliver and the requirements keeps on changing. So we have this incremental approach, and this incremental approach to make sure that we are delivering and accommodating for the changes. In general, the principles that I have been discussing, it is not something that is written on a solid stone. This is the principles that you always need to discuss with your team as a Scrum Master, if you're a Scrum Master. This is the principles that has to guide the execution of any project in the Agile methodology. Type. Let's talk about what we call a customer prioritization. We keep on saying that we have a backlog of requirement, which is usually kept in the product backlog. And this backlog of requirement, the customer or the business team is prioritizing those requirements, and the Scrum Master and the Scrum team will choose from this backlog based on the priority that is set to each and every requirement. So how prioritization is taking how prioritization is taking place. Prioritization might be taking place by a methodology that is called Pareto rule. Yeah, what is meant by Pareto rule? Pareto rule means 80, or it's called Pareto, or it's called as well 80-20 rules. Okay? What is the 80-20 rules? Do you have any idea about the Pareto? Have you ever heard about the Pareto? Pareto is what we called 80-20 rule, and this suggests that the most important features or the most important functionality of the product will be obtained from only developing 20% uh, of the features. So if you have, let's say it in another word, if you have a backlog of requirement of 100 requirements, the Pareto rule suggests that only if you implement 20 percent or 20 of those requirements, 80% of the benefits expected to be achieved from this product will be achieved. So while doing the prioritization with the customer, we need to focus on those 20 features that will develop 80% of the benefit of the product. So 80-20 rule, as you can see here, after 20, a point of diminishing returns. يعني إيه? What is meant by point of diminishing returns? It means that the other functionalities or the other 80 functionalities that is still pending is still going to introduce benefits, but most of the benefits, like 80% of the benefits of the software, will be realized by implementing those 20 requirements. So this is a way of prioritizing the requirement. Factors that has to be considered in prioritizing the requirement: financial value, the value that will be perceived if this functionality is delivered, cost of developing the new feature, what is the cost of develop this specific new feature, amount of and significance of the learning and the knowledge will be gained during developing this feature, risk that will be removed by reducing this feature. So I'm just here trying to give you a glimpse around how to prioritize. So factors that needs to be considered while prioritizing: the cost of development and the value. So this is like, it's very well-known terminology in business that is called return on investment. What is the benefits you are gaining, which is the financial value, versus the cost of developing this feature. Another two important factors, which is the risk removed by developing this feature and the learnings you will get from developing this feature. Okay. Another very well-known method in terms of prioritization, which is called Moscow prioritization. Moscow prioritization techniques. Probably most of us have seen this, but we have never knew. Myself, I come to know that this is called Moscow prioritization. Not very far from from now. So this is basically we list the requirements by must have. So this is must have to have a workable, usable set or minimum workable software. Should have, okay. And last would be could have, and items which is won't have or out of scope of this time frame. So this means that the must have, this is something that cannot be descoped. I cannot implement the project without those requirements. If I fail to implement those requirements, it means I fail to deliver the project. Should have, those items can be descoped, but will not deliver or will not, this has to be like a last resort, the last option. Could have, this is something that it's nice to have if it's there and if it is affordable, and it's cheap to implement, then it is nice to have them or possible to have them. Won't have, this is something that we are sure from day one that they are going to be descoped, or this is something that it will not be delivered as part of this project. So this is again another way of developing, another way of doing the prioritization with the customer on the needs of the requirements. So 100% of the effort, usually the must have takes 60% of the effort. So 60% means that without those feature, um, this software is gonna fail, or this product is gonna fail. And then should have and could have. Should have is around like 20, another 20%, and could have, which is contingency. If you have enough time and enough effort, then you could have those could have, that is nice to have feature. Okay, clear? So this is how to prioritize the requirement. Again, why we are doing prioritization of the requirements? Because we have a product backlog, and for each and every iteration, we have to revisit the prioritization of the backlog to choose the requirements that will go for development in this specific iteration. Okay, who decides? The project team is the one who has to decide. It's not the business itself. It is not the Scrum Master itself. We have mentioned several times that in Agile project management, we have a team, self-organized team, that we empower them to take decision. So this is the way or this is how who should be deciding on each and every item. A must have, as we mentioned, we have to deliver this or cancel the project. Usually the project manager may, or the scrum master may challenge those must have. The business team definitely is the ones that should be finalizing or have the final say in terms of the must have, because the final team or the business team are the customer, and the customer is always has the final say to say yes, we should be including those, and this is a must have non-negotiable items for me, or no. Okay. But let's have a quick overview on Moscow technique, which is a real life example. Walmart, which is a giant retailer, wants to launch a news website where consumer durable orders can be placed online. Walmart want to have a website where the orders can be placed online. Tom is the product owner. So Tom here is representing the customer, because he's the product owner, and the product owner is always the business side or the customer side, is faced with the challenge of prioritizing the following requirements. We have several requirements, which is the hardware setup, the customer registration, how the customer will log in, capture shipping details, shipping update through SMS, order placement, search options on site, online payment. So he has here a list of requirements that has to be into the software, and he really have a hard time organizing those items. Type, what would you do? I mean, in terms of those items, what do you think you would do as must have, should have, and could have? But for the sake of time, I will answer this one. So the must have things is definitely to have the initial setup or the hardware setup. Search options on site. We have to give the customer the options to search on site, because if he's not able to search what his need, he will not be able to place an order from the very first place. So order placement, this is definitely a must have. Shipping details, you will not be able to deliver unless you have the shipping details. Should have or could have can be customer registration. You might request an order with or without having to do a customer registration. And the same for customer login. Online payment. Online payment is a desirable feature where customer can pay with their Visa card, but still you can have the customer paying at their doorstep if you are not able to put online payment at the first iteration. Shipment update through SMS. Once the shipment has been delivered, I can provide the customer with an update that the order has been shipped. But this is again something that is nice to have or should or could have. It is not necessarily to be there, or it is not, I mean, if we don't have and shipping details or order placement, we will not have a workable solution. But if we don't have an online payment, we still can have a workable solution, maybe not the best for from the customer perspective, but at least it serves for the purpose. Is it clear how we do prioritization? So we do prioritization either by 80-20 rules, which means that what is the requirements that will fit or that will provide 80% of the benefits of the project, and this is usually 20% of the requirements. So this is the Pareto model. Another model, which is the Moscow, which is must have, should have, and could have, which is the way to organize requirement around. Is it clear? طيب, I will take this as yes. The Kano model, which are three different factors involved in customer satisfaction. So customer satisfaction is coming from three different factors. Basic factors, if you don't, I mean, if you don't have these basic needs, you will have the customer dissatisfied. Performance factors, which means that you give a higher level of quality or higher level of service to your customer. Excitement factor, which means this is how you make the customer super happy and provide the customer with service level that he was not expecting to have. So this is a way, another way of reorganizing the features into excitement factor, which is usually nice to have by making the customer fancy things to the customer, and performance factor as well, which is as well nice to have, which is makes that you are providing higher level to the customer. Basic factor, which is a must have, and if you don't have this basic factor, you will get the customer to be dissatisfied. So it's another way of doing prioritization based on performance, basic requirements. If you fail to provide those basic factors, you have low customer satisfaction. And performance, where you provide a higher degree of service level to the customer. Excitement, how to make the customer that is very much excited and happy around the product that you are delivering. So this is again um, a way of how to manage or to do the prioritization for your products. Let's take an example of a Kano analysis or a Kano prioritization. So a big mobile handset company is planning to launch a new version of their mobile. So we have a big mobile handset company and they're planning to launch a new version of their mobile. Jeffson, which is the product owner, and this usually represents the business or the customer side, has come up with a list of features. So we have a list of features to be included into the mobile. And Jeff chooses to use the Kano analysis to prioritize those requirements. So we have phone book, we have calling, we have messaging, we have call logs, we have time, we have cameras, we have Bluetooth, infrared transfer, and file transfer. So I think it's pretty much clear. If it's the basic requirements, is definitely, we are talking about mobile. So the basic requirements is definitely the phone book, the calling, the messaging, the call logs, and timing. This is basic requirements. If you fail to deliver this, you will get customers dissatisfied. Type performance factor, which means that you are providing a higher level of performance or better service level to your customer if you provide Bluetooth, infrared camera. Exciters and delighters, something that is like exciting the customer and making the customer super happy if you do instant file transfer. This is something that is not in any mobile. And if you manage to do this, you will manage to get your customer super happy around that. Last method I'm gonna explore today for the periodization is to provide a weight for your to provide a weighting system or relative weighting system for um, for your set of requirements. So you provide a scale from 1 to 9, for example, and you here have the feature, and you provide a scale from 1 to 9. And you score for each and every feature. What is the benefit if you deliver this feature, and what is the penalty or the drawback if you don't deliver this feature? And then you come up with like the total weight. Okay, and what is the percentage for each and every value for each and every feature? To what is the cost? Okay, for each and every feature, what is the cost percentage, what is the risk, and then you will come up by multiplying those factors together, you will come up with the priority set. So this is basically, and here the priority is defined as a value percentage divided by cost percentage plus risk percentage. Okay, so you just it's more of a complicated approach. Usually, from what I have seen into day-to-day life, usually this techniques is not happening I mean, not taking place unless it's super complicated project. So you give basically a weighting system for for your features. So what's the benefits, what's the penalty if you don't implement this feature, and then you give a value. So 100% of the value of the product is distributed among the features. So each and every this feature is those two features are the most features that's going to present a value. And what is the cost percentage? So 100% of the cost is again of the project is going to be distributed among the feature. 100% of the risks is associated as well, going to be distributed in each and every feature. And then you come up with this formula, or you use this formula to determine the priority, and you pick the priority number. This is priority 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. So this is how you prioritize your work. um okay, so yeah, minimum marketable feature. Sorry, this is the last one that I'm going to talk about. For the minimum marketable feature is that you want to have the smallest set of functionality that provides value to the market to make sure that you can introduce this project to the market. So you choose the priority based on something that is called a minimum marketable feature, which is the smallest set of functionality that provides value to the market. What is the value? What is the features that will provide a value to the market and to the external customers? And this is how you organize and prioritize your feature. So let's have this one as a quick quiz. What occurs after the minimally marketable features are developed in an iteration? So the correct answer is B, where you have the project starts gold plating its features. Gold plating its feature, you look into what the customer is looking for and you start developing it. In Kano model, which of the following category would a new feature like a 1,000-hour battery life on a cell phone falls into? Is it a performance? Is it a threshold? Is it exciter? I believe this is a must-have. So at least having a hour battery of life, a battery is a must-have feature. But I'm sorry, I'm a bit behind, so this is why I'm moving a bit super fast here.
Anyone have any question before I move into the Scrum and the roles and responsibilities into the Scrum? And this is going to be the last part of this. I'm just going to say who's the product owner, who's the Scrum master, blah, 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 and so on. So any questions before I move into the Scrum roles and responsibilities? So this we have seen together. So this is the product backlog, and this is the sprint backlog. So from the sprint, this is where we do the release planning. After we choose the sprint backlog, we start to do the sprint planning. After the print, which is usually takes 2 to 4 time, we use the sprint review. And right after we have a workable software, we have the sprint retrospective, which is the lessons learned for each and every sprint. But the coming section, I will only be talking around those 3 roles as defined into the Scrum. Product owner, which owns the product, and this is the customer side. So they are responsible to make sure that the product is a success into the market. Scrum master, which is in the traditional methodology or in the traditional waterfall methodology, we refer to him as the project manager. Last is the team, which is the small team, which is all the stakeholder who's managing to work into the sprints, and usually they refer to as the development team. Yep, here we are. Okay, so again, those are the 3 roles. So product owner is representing the business side, and those are the ones who's responsible to market the product into the market. Okay, so they resist the temptation to manage the team. So they usually have to resist the temptation to manage the team. Yes, they are the customer, but they have to resist to manage the team. The Scrum Master is working closely with the product owner, and the Scrum Master is actually the link between the product owner and the team. His role is to provide direction, to facilitate the creativity, and to ensure the team is having the right empowerment to deliver. The team is actually the team who's developing the product and making sure that the product is fitting to purpose. Okay? Type. We have already described those. Product backlog, which is overall the product requirements. Sprint backlog, which is the list of committed requirements that will be addressed within a sprint. Burn down or burn up chart is the visual aid tracking the team progress. So it's just like how well we are or how fast we are going into delivering our project. And velocity charts, which tracks the rate of feature. Anyway, I mean, we are very much concerned with the product backlog and the sprint backlog because this is where we keep the requirements of each and every project. Um, we have already as well explained this. So in the sprint planning, we have, this is the planning for the sprint. So we have here the sprint backlog, and this we have here a list of requirements that will be met or will be achieved by the end of this sprint. And then we have the sprint execution. We have a daily scrum or stand up, which is a 15-minute discussion between the team to address issues, concerns if it's happening. We have a sprint review, which is to test the functionality and to make sure that the functionality is working fine after the execution. Okay, we have the retrospective, which is to document the lessons learned after each and every sprint. So again, it's another way of saying the same things. So we have here the product backlog and the initial planning, and you here for each and every sprint, you see that we have a release planning, and the release is containing several sprints. And for each sprint, we have a sprint backlog. After we picked up the sprint backlog, we have to start the sprint planning, and you have to start executing the user stories for each and every requirement that we have selected. And then we finish sprint number 1. After finishing sprint number 1, we start doing the retrospective and then move forward with the sprint number 2. You have a backlog, you have a screening, planning for the sprint, and you implement several user stories. So this is a release that has 3 sprints, and this is another release that has 3 sprints, and so on and so forth. So release number 1 here, it contains feature 1. Here it contains feature 2 and features 3, and this is what we consider a release planning. Okay, so again, here it's like we have sprint and we have the planning of the sprint, and then we do daily scrum for each and every day, and then we do the sprint review where we test the functionalities, and then retrospective, and then we start the following sprint planning. يبقى this is the way we manage Scrum meetings in general. We start with release planning, and then after release planning, we start with the sprint planning for each and every sprint within the release. And we have a daily Scrum meeting. After the daily Scrum meeting and after execution of the sprint, we have the sprint review, which is testing the functionality of the sprint, and then the retrospective, where we put the lessons learned for each and every sprint. So sprint backlog is coming basically from the product backlog and the release backlog, and this is where we start working on the backlog item following an iteration approach. Okay, so one of the basics of the Scrum and the Agile is to make sure we work on a collaborative approach, or a way where people are working together rather than working into silos as they used to work before. Is it clear so far, or I'm a bit too fast here? Okay, so the A ensures that requests are expressed in user stories or other appropriate format and placed in the, I think it is the product owner who ensures that the requests are expressed into the user stories. So the customer has to make sure that all the requests are captured and captured into the product work backlog. Type. The what provides story points estimation for each. The team provides estimation around the time and effort that is needed. Product owners user stories, then with input from the team and other stakeholders, sequence user stories into. So usually the product owners prioritize the user stories because they are the customer and they're the one who has to provide the direction in terms of prioritization, and sequence the stories and put them into releases. Type. Another question. At the end of each, the team demonstrates, so at the end of each sprint, the team demonstrates a working software that they do at the sprint review. So during the sprint review, they have a working software. The total story points estimate of those stories that were completed in a sprint are added together to provide us with what for the sprint? The total story point estimate for those stories that were completed in a sprint are added together to provide us with the sprint retrospective, which is the lessons learned. Okay. Number 6, which is basically the team holds a the team holds a sprint retrospective to evaluate how well they have done and what changes could be made to improve the future improve. So this is the sprint retrospective, um, and this one is the velocity. I'm sorry, this one, number J, is the velocity. I'm sorry for that. So the total story points estimate for those stories that were completed in a sprint are added together to put us with the sprint velocity or the velocity of the sprint. back to the point. So again, the Scrum roles, we have mentioned the product owner, which represent the business side, and this is usually the person who provides direction and prioritization for the requirements. The Scrum Master, which is accountable overall for the project and for the team, and his role is to facilitate the work between the development team and the product owner, and the development team, which is actually the team working on the development or implementation. So this is basically to cover in detail the roles of responsibility of each and every person. So product owner is to establish return on investment, and this is one of the ways to prioritize, is to make sure what is the benefit versus the cost of implementation. Establish communication. Um, he will have to guide in terms of prioritization of the product backlog to maximize the return on investment. Okay, so he's doing the prioritization to make sure that we are maximizing the return on investment. Okay. Busy product owners need not and should not act alone. So if you are a busy product owner, you should have other roles that can help you as business analyst to give you reports and give you the business needs and define the business needs and elaborate on them. You have developers, you have user experience, you have the people who will be actually using the stores or actually using the softwares. They have to come up with an ideas around how they want this product to look like, and other stakeholder. So they are not a single person. Okay, so that's basically for a product owner. Then a Scrum Master, as we have mentioned, this Scrum Master is basically concerned with the facilitation between the development team and the product owner. He has to convey the message in return in regards to the return on investment from the product team to the from the product owner to the development team. He ensures that principles and values of Agile are in place. He has to facilitate the work to improve productivity as much as possible. He has to encourage the team. He has to be honest. He has to be learning fast. He has to make sure that Agile mindset and agility principles are well adapted. Typical activities for a Scrum Master is to ensure that everyone is doing what they have agreed to be done, is to facilitate the Scrum sessions. So he's the one who has to make sure that the daily Scrums are happening, the sprint retrospective is happening, the sprint planning is happening. I'm always looking for a way to improve the productivity of the team. Um, so he is a one who's actually having no authority. So here we're not having a traditional authority for a project manager that we used to have in the project team. He is more of a leader and to coach and facilitate the working of the team. So again, to facilitate group decision making, to explore possibilities, to seek agreements between the teams. So he's not an authority, he's not having an actual authority. His role is just to make sure we build foundation between the team, explore possibilities, generating options, and seeking agreements between the team. He has to be an active listener, maintaining an eye contact, engaging himself, and so on and so forth. So it's like more of a leader than more of a leader or more of a coach than a real authority, someone with authority as the project manager. He has to work on resolving conflicts within the team by by different levels of conflict resolution, like figuring out the problem to solve, uh, making sure that to have less disagreement, and so on and so forth. So this is basically the role of the Scrum Master, is to negotiate with the people. It is more of a charismatic approach rather than really someone with authority. So he has to be active listening, working with the people, engaging them, empowering them, focusing on their interesting, and so on. Okay. And definitely the project team is the team who's actually developing the project. So last thing, I'm sorry I've been moving too fast, but just for the sake of time, the Scrum Master is someone who removes what? Um, between development and between the development and the customer. So definitely the Scrum Master acts as facilitator to remove any barriers between the product team or the product owner, which is the business side, and the development team. Um, who would not have been a very good Scrum Master? Uh, Bill Lim Limberch is not gonna be a very likely a good Scrum Master, and you can Google the guy to understand better or to understand more. Um, I'm just like trying to capture for 6 time. I'm moving so fast on this one. Sorry. Um, who are artists? So basically, we have servant leaders. So basically, this is the role of a Scrum Master, is to act more of a servant leader to facilitate rather than to be a manager. So this is why I was saying Scrum Master has to be a leader more than a manager. With level 1 conflict, we seek a situation. We definitely, with level 1, we seek to have a win-win situation by problem solving, by the solving of the problem itself. When facilitating a group, a Scrum Master should build a foundation, explore possibilities, and seek for agreements. You need to be aware of others' feelings, needs, and consensus to possess empathy. And this is basically for Scrum Master. I'm sorry I've been moving so fast so far. So for now, I'm done with the Agile. So please make sure. Just have a question. Do you have any questions so far on what we have been discussing early today? To complete the post assessment, you have to complete your post assessment on the following link, and please leave us a feedback on this session, on the chatting session as well. We need to make sure that please fill your post assessment to get your certificate of attendance. You will not get your certificate of attendance unless you complete the certificate, unless you complete the post assessment for the class. So please make sure you complete the post assessment. Um, any question you have on the training so far? Um, how well was the training, or how would you suggest to improve the training for the future? I know it's a bit, I mean, one thing I know it's like a bit of too much. So maybe we can either, I mean, I just wanted to make sure that I put as much information as I can, but one area of improvement is maybe have this course delivered on 6 hours instead of 4. We'll see how it goes, but any areas of improvement, any feedback you can leave? Okay, so please go and fill up your post assessment to be able to get your certificate of attendance. Thank you so much for watching and listening to me over the past 2 days. I know it has been somehow much, and you can always come back to the online portal where you can find online. Thank you, Zil Al Khafi. You can always come back um, to the training portal where you can find other sessions of online. I think I've been moving a little bit faster today just because I've mentioned I was trying to give as much as information as possible. So thank you so much, and see you soon. And before I leave you, I would love to wish you a very, very happy new year, and hoping that 2019 will be prosperous and will be a year full of peace and joy, and all your wishes come true in 2019. Thank you so much, and speak to you in upcoming courses. Thank you all. Bye.